The speeches, of course, are in public domain, and what everyone's really going to pick up the book for is how you explain the context of those speeches. There are prescripts and postscripts to each one of them. The introduction is already making headlines, and in the introduction, you talk about demonetization, and you say that you need to clear the air because there has been a lot of speculation as to whether you were on board or not on board, and you were clearly not on board. That's very, very clear. In fact, the phrase you use is that you say that you orally expressed in no uncertain terms, that's the phrase, the pitfalls with addressing the issue of black money in this way, and you suggested alternatives. You then write that the government asked you to, the RBI prepares a note, and in that note, not just do you offer alternatives, but you also talk about what time period is needed to implement this. My question is, how did the government respond when you put up these reservations?
Well, so first let me start by saying the reason I talk about this is the only part of my relationship with the government that I'm explicit about. Reason is because I understand that Parliament has asked questions about it. My response has been recorded in a way to Parliament, and it was important that I state for the public record what the actual situation was, so that there's no sense of ambiguity on what the RBI told the government. And I think, you know, it's important to reflect on episodes like demonetization to understand what kinds of lessons this carries for government policy, and therefore having the truth out there in some sense is important. In response to a variety of sources from which the government got information, it set up a group in the finance ministry to which we sent a participant, a deputy governor, which then took forward the discussion on demonetization after we sent this note. So our deputy governor attended. My hope was if the government ever decided to go ahead, it would do what was necessary as we described it.
And it did not?
It happened after I left office. Clearly, any monetary economist would say, don't do it until you have all the money printed.
I'd like to read out the operative part from the book. This is in the introduction. You said, I was then asked to prepare a note which the RBI put together and handed to the government. It outlined the potential costs and benefits of demonetization as well as alternatives that could achieve similar aims. If the government, on weighing the pros and cons, still decided to go ahead with demonetization, the note outlined the preparation that would be needed and the time that the preparation would take. The RBI flagged what would happen if the preparation was inadequate. Professor Rajan, may I ask you to elaborate a little bit on how much time you think would have been ideal? Now, it's clear that you did not think demonetization itself was ideal. But then you said, if you've got to do it, this is the amount of time and these are the preparations needed. How much time did you think was needed?
Let me say that again. I think if you take a poll of monetary economists, they would tell you on the day that you actually do it, you should be prepared to replace as much currency as needed for transactions. So it's not the entire currency you're withdrawing, because some of that you presume is not held for transaction purposes, some for black money, some because people just have it lying around their house. I'm sure you had some.
That's a trick question. I mean, we have small we all have some small cash at home, but that's not black money.
No, 1,000 rupee note was also used for transactions. So we all had some in our wallet.
Of course, to function on a daily basis, yes.
So as a result, what I'm saying is that, you know, some people were saving, some housewives are saving on that basis and so on. So you have to replace everything that's used for transactions, because otherwise, if people can't do transactions, not everybody can switch to electronic media overnight. It will cause a reduction in economic activity. So I think if you just take a poll of monetary economists, they say be ready to replace on day one. If you don't want
the entire currency
in economic activity, be ready to replace everything that was used for transactions.
But this was 86% of the cash inflow that we were talking about.
You would replace a significant fraction of that, not in all 86%, but enough so that anybody who wanted money would be able to take it out from the ATM.
The opposite of that happened. I take you back to the RBI note when you were there, and therefore it's about you. How much time ideally would the RBI have had the government spend to follow a policy that the RBI was not in favor of to begin with?
Well, again, the time it would take to print all the currency. Now you can see that the RBI has been working at double speed over the last few months trying to print that currency. And you know, when the amount was printed, that sort of reduced the kind of stress in the system.
Right.
So that will give you a sense of if the RBI was working at double speed. Now, if you're working in secrecy, you can't work at double speed. You have to work at single speed. So that would give you a sense of the amount of time that it would have taken.
What were some of the other preparations that you recommended apart from having the currency or the cash flow not choked?
Well, I can't give you the details of the note, and I don't want to talk about the details of the note. But I think, again, the kinds of points at which you would have to withdraw currency should be prepared, again on day one, so that people can take the money out that they need to conduct their transactions. If you're not prepared either with the money or with the sort of ATMs and so on to deliver that currency, clearly you're going to have more stress in the system.
Now, a theme in your book that comes up actually more than once is the independence of the RBI. And I think the phrase you use is, you say that we're not a fifth column in the government, you're not there as an opposition agent, but you're very clear that you're not just, when I say you, I don't just mean you, Raghuram Rajan, but the RBI governor must not be treated as just another bureaucrat or a regulator. I want to link this a little bit to the demonetization debate, because what a lot of media and public are now asking, if Raghuram Rajan and the RBI was not in favor of demonetization, who was? On whose advice did the government actually proceed with the decision to demonetize? And given that it bypassed the RBI quite clearly, does that not undermine the independence of the RBI as an institution?
So there is a very real question on whether the government can demonetize without the RBI.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the, I think it was 1978 experience, it actually brought in an ordinance and was able to do it without the Reserve Bank acquiescing. So ultimately, there are channels through which legally the government can bypass the RBI on this issue. So there are some other issues on which it cannot, but on this one it can. There is also in the RBI Act the capacity for the government to give a directive to the RBI on anything. It's never been exercised. But it has the capacity to actually tell the RBI to do something. So in that sense, I think your independence comes from the fact that these kinds of instruments are typically not used by the government. And ultimately, if the governor disagrees, I think Dr. Y.V. Reddy had a very interesting response to what he would have done. He said he would have gone into the hospital and then resigned, gone into the hospital to establish that there was some difference
of opinion.
No, that it wasn't that he was resigning because of that, because he didn't want to roil markets, but because of health reasons.
Yeah.
Now, some people can't go into the hospital because they look the picture of health, in which case they have to resign without doing it. But that is
would you have resigned if you'd continued as RBI? Would you have either checked into a hospital or resigned if you'd
that is the only option
the governor?
That as I said, the governor has if he disagrees with any kind of policy. I think it's a hypothetical question I don't want to answer, because if you're not faced with that situation, I think it's easy to say that you would have done X or Y.
How would you assess today, knowing what you do, and knowing that as the RBI governor, you did sort of issue this health warning, how would you assess the success or not of demonetization? There were 2-3 stated aims. One was to address black money, the second was to increase the tax base and increase digitization, and the last was terrorism funding. I think the last, I don't think we have seen any significant breakthroughs in it. The first, it's quite clear that this money is now back in the banks, and unless the taxman can pull out something substantive, it hasn't happened. The second, there is some debate about that. Do we actually see an expanded tax base? Do we actually see an increase in digitization? How do you measure the impact and the consequences of demonetization?
Well, I think the possible impact on taxes, we have to wait and see. I think the economic survey talked about new taxpayers, but talked about 10,000 crores more. Now, 10,000 crores, if it's a first down payment, that's fine. That's a reasonable thing. if it represents the sum of what we can expect to see, given the potential cost, that seems relatively small. I think if you look at the digitization, we saw a blip up in digitization and then a blip down after the stress period was over.
Yeah.
We have to see what the longer term sort of effects are. As far as the graphs that this economic survey put out, it seems to me it's basically back to the trend line. It is grown, but that it was growing anyway. Digital transactions were growing in India. I think UPI has benefited substantially, but UPI was in very early days when demonetization was done. So you would expect fairly strong growth, but I think there has been some contribution there, which is positive. Now, you have to weigh all this against the costs, and India was growing at about 7.5 to 8% at the point of demonetization. We've come down substantially. Now, some of this has been because of demonetization, but remember, the world economy is growing stronger than it was, at the time of, last year. And so, in that sense, we should be going up with the tide. The trend line should have moved up in growth.
Yeah.
In fact, it has moved down. So, is this only because of demonetization?
What do you think?
Probably not. I think there are three factors at this point. One is the stress in the banking system and the bad loan situation, the stalled projects. That has been a problem with us for the last 3 years. We need to take strong action sooner rather than later. We've talked about this for a long time. We need to do something. The second is the demonetization, and the third is anticipation of the goods and services tax.
Yeah.
I think these three blows have come. The first was steady since 2013. We've picked up the bad loans. The second, the demonetization, has been a jhatka, and the third is the goods and services tax. At this point, our growth is not anything to write home about. Hopefully, these are temporary factors, but certainly we have to make sure that our business people feel more confident going forward. Private investment is very low. That's why jobs aren't being created. We need to get this back, and for that, they have to have confidence going forward that there are no more surprises.